It only took one careless sentence at a dinner party to shatter everything I thought was unbreakable. My name is Claire, and for most of my life, I believed I was living in the kind of marriage people envied. Michael and I had been together for nearly 20 years. We weren't perfect, no marriage is, but if you asked me back then, would have said we were strong, steady, and unshakable. He was the calm to my storms, the patient one when I rushed ahead, the quiet man who carried the weight of our home without complaint. Michael was in his mid-40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that never needed to be loud. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention in a crowd, but the kind who made people feel safe simply by being there. Loyal. Dependable. A good father to our 2 kids, a good provider, a good man. Our life together was the picture of stability, weekday routines, family dinners, Saturday soccer games, the occasional date night when we managed to find a sitter. From the outside, it probably looked boring to some, but to me it was comfort. It was home. And yet, underneath that comfort, there was a part of me that craved excitement, the kind of laughter and teasing you see in sitcoms. So I developed a habit, one I never thought much about at the time, making little jokes at Michael's expense. It started small, light-hearted teasing about his punctuality, or how he always double-checked the locks before bed. Friends would chuckle, and Michael would just smile, sometimes roll his eyes. He never made a scene. I thought it was harmless. In fact, I convinced myself it made us look like that playful, easygoing couple who could poke fun at each other without it meaning anything deeper. The truth. I never once stopped to consider how it made him feel. Michael was patient, almost endlessly so. He didn't snap back, didn't correct me, didn't embarrass me in return. And I mistook that patience for tolerance. I assumed that silence meant he didn't mind, that my little digs were nothing more than background noise in the rhythm of our marriage. I couldn't have been more wrong. Looking back now, I realize that love can endure a lot, arguments, disagreements, even mistakes, but public disrespect is like poison. And the night I crossed that invisible line, in front of our friends, with one careless sentence I thought was just another joke, everything I thought was solid began to crumble. It only took one careless sentence at a dinner party to shatter everything I thought was unbreakable. My name is Claire, and if you had asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have said it was steady, maybe even enviable. I was married to a man most women would dream of, Michael. He was in his mid-40s, calm where I was impulsive, patient where I was fiery, steady where I could sometimes be reckless. He didn't raise his voice, didn't play games, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Michael was the kind of man who showed his love in consistency, quietly filling the gas tank before I noticed it was low, making sure the kids' homework was checked, and kissing me goodnight even on the days when we barely had the energy to speak. We had 2 kids, a comfortable home, and a life that, from the outside, looked picture perfect. Our days ran on a dependable rhythm, breakfasts before school, evening family dinners, weekends spent at soccer matches and grocery runs. We weren't the kind of couple posting glamorous vacations or surprise getaways on social media, but I thought our kind of love was deeper, rooted in stability and trust. And for years, I told myself that meant we were unshakable. That no matter what bumps came our way, we'd weather them because we had built something solid. But the truth is, sometimes the cracks don't come from storms. Sometimes, they come from the smallest, most ordinary things, the things you think are harmless. For me, it was the little jokes. I had this habit of poking fun at Michael in front of others. The space where his shoes lined up neatly was bare. The drawers he always kept so meticulously folded were half empty. No note. No fight. No explanation. Just absence. I called his phone, straight to voicemail. I checked the garage, his car was gone. I ran through the house, half expecting him to pop up and tell me it was a mistake. But he wasn't there. Michael hadn't slammed the door. He hadn't shouted or cursed or left broken glass in his wake. He had simply vanished. And in that moment, I realized his silence wasn't weakness. It was his choice. His revenge. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, panic, and a strange kind of grief that didn't have a name. At first, I couldn't believe it was real. I kept expecting Michael to walk back through the door, carrying groceries, acting as if nothing had happened. But the silence stretched on, and reality sank in. He was gone. I called him over and over. That night, after the dinner party, I expected an explosion. I braced myself for it, actually. The moment the door closed behind us, I half expected Michael to finally unleash everything he had been holding in, to accuse me of disrespecting him, to demand an apology, maybe even to shout for the first time in our marriage. But there was nothing. He helped me take off my coat, hung up his jacket, and moved around the house in silence. I kept glancing at him, waiting for the outburst, the argument, the storm. Instead, he brushed his teeth, folded his shirt neatly over the chair, and climbed into bed without a word. That silence was worse than any shouting match could have been. I remember standing there in the dim light of our bedroom, clutching my earrings in my hand, my heart pounding with this strange mix of guilt and frustration. I wanted him to say something. To react. To give me the chance to explain that it was just a joke, that I didn't mean anything by it. But he just nodded when I asked if he was okay, rolled onto his side, and went to sleep. The next morning, he was polite but distant. He poured me coffee, kissed the kids goodbye, and left for work. No mention of the night before. No simmering anger. Just cold courtesy. At first, I thought he was letting it go. But then the days passed. And the silence stayed. He didn't laugh at my jokes. Not even the harmless ones. When I teased him about forgetting his keys, he didn't roll his eyes or smile. He just said, "Right," and picked them up. When I tried to start a conversation at dinner, he answered with one-syllable responses. He was there, but not really there. I told myself it was a phase. That he'd come around. That Michael was just cooling off and, eventually, we'd laugh about how overly sensitive he had been. But then one morning, I woke up to find the bed beside me empty. At first, I thought he'd gone for an early run. But when I glanced at his closet, my stomach dropped. Half of his clothes were gone. It started as light-hearted teasing, about how he double-checked the locks every night like a man obsessed with security, or how he refused to leave the house without his dad jacket, no matter the season. People would laugh, and Michael, true to his nature, would just smile politely, maybe shake his head. He never made a scene. And I mistook that silence for permission. I thought it was playful, that I was showing off our closeness, that we were the kind of couple who could tease each other and laugh about it later. I told myself it made us look fun, relatable, even strong. But what I failed to realize was that every joke was a cut, small, quiet, but sharp. And cuts add up. I never stopped to ask if he minded. I never wondered if my laughter came at the cost of his pride. Michael was patient, endlessly so, but patience is not the same as indifference. I didn't know it then, but all it would take was one careless sentence, one joke I thought was harmless, to unravel everything. Each time, his voicemail answered with the same calm tone I had heard 1,000 times before. "This is Michael. Leave a message." I left dozens, pleas, apologies, angry demands, but never received a reply. Texts went unanswered. Emails came back with nothing but a cold void. My friends noticed before long. "Where's Michael?" they asked, curiosity flickering in their eyes. I tried to explain, fumbling with words, but every time I told the story out loud, how I'd made a joke at a dinner party and then he left, it sounded ridiculous. Trivial. Like something no one would ever walk away from. And yet, he had. That's when the whispers started. Some of my friends pitied me, others judged me. I overheard someone say, he must have found someone else. Why else would he leave so suddenly? My own family wasn't much kinder. My mother shook her head and said softly, "Claire, you should have respected him more. Men don't forget humiliation." And maybe that was the cruelest part, realizing that, deep down, they were right. Nights became the hardest. I would lie in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, replaying the dinner party in my head. The clinking of glasses, the laughter of our friends, the words tumbling out of my mouth. "Michael's just a little controlling sometimes, but that's why I keep him around." Everyone had laughed. I laughed. And Michael had just sat there, silent, swallowing the shame. At the time, I thought nothing of it. But now, replaying it over and over, I felt the weight of what I had done. I hadn't just made a joke, I had stripped him of his dignity in front of people he respected. And when dignity is gone, sometimes love follows with it. The spiral tightened around me. Guilt clawed at my chest, anger bubbled inside at his silence, and yet regret always won. Because the truth was undeniable, I had destroyed my marriage with one thoughtless moment, and there was no way to take it back. It wasn't until weeks later that I finally learned where Michael had gone. A mutual friend, someone we both knew from the neighborhood, called me unexpectedly. She spoke carefully, almost like she was afraid to reveal too much, but eventually she said the words that left me frozen: "Michael's living in another city. He's fine, he just doesn't want to be found." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind immediately went to the worst: another woman, a secret life, betrayal on his part. But then she added, "He's alone. He hasn't moved on. He's just living quietly." Quietly. That word cut deeper than any knife. Michael hadn't left me for someone else, hadn't stormed out in a fit of rage, hadn't tried to hurt me. He had simply chosen peace over conflict. And in that instant, I remembered a conversation we'd had years earlier. We had been watching a movie where the husband embarrassed his wife in public, and I laughed it off, saying, "That's what couples do." A little teasing never hurt anyone. Michael's expression had turned serious. He looked at me and said softly, "Claire, the one thing I could never forgive is public disrespect. You can fight with me in private, but if you make me small in front of others, that's different. That cuts too deep." At the time, I had laughed, brushed it off as Michael being overly sensitive. I even teased him about it later, thinking he was exaggerating. But he hadn't been joking. He had been warning me. And I hadn't listened. The weight of that memory crushed me. A few days after learning where he was, I stumbled upon something I had missed, something that nearly broke me. While searching through our dresser, I found an envelope tucked in the back of a drawer I rarely used. My name was written on it in Michael's steady handwriting. My hands shook as I tore it open. It wasn't a long letter. Just a single page, written with the same calm clarity that had defined him. He wrote that he still loved me, but love couldn't survive without respect. That he had spent years swallowing his pride for the sake of our family, but the dinner party had been the breaking point, the moment he realized I would never see how deeply the jokes cut. He said he wasn't leaving in anger, but in silence, because fighting me would only cheapen what we once had. And at the bottom, he left one final line that I will never forget: "I chose silence because it's the only voice you can't argue with." I sat on the floor clutching that letter, realizing I hadn't just lost a husband. I had lost the only man who had ever loved me without condition. And I had handed him the reason to walk away. I used to believe that silence was weakness. That real strength came from fighting, from raising your voice, from refusing to let go without a battle. But now I know the truth: silence can be the strongest weapon, the deepest revenge, and the most final goodbye. When Michael left, I expected him to come back, eventually. I thought he'd confront me, demand answers, maybe even yell. That's what people do when they still care, right? They fight. They claw for the pieces of what's broken. They scream because they still want to be heard. But he didn't. He left with his dignity intact. No screaming. No pleading. No second chances. Just a silence so heavy it still echoes in every corner of this house. And in many ways, that silence has been louder than any argument could ever be. I walk through our rooms now, remembering the way his laughter once filled them, and all I hear is absence. Every time I reach for my phone, a part of me still expects his name to light up the screen. But all I get is quiet. And the quiet is merciless. I destroyed my marriage with one sentence. One careless attempt at humor that cut deeper than I ever imagined. And now, no matter how many nights I lie awake replaying it in my head, no matter how many apologies I whisper into the darkness, nothing will bring him back. People ask me sometimes what happened. And I can never explain it in a way that makes sense. To them, it sounds absurd, a marriage ended over a joke. But to Michael, it wasn't just a joke. It was a betrayal of the respect he had asked for, begged for, in his own quiet way. It was proof that I never truly listened. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all. Because he warned me once. He told me the one thing he couldn't forgive. And I laughed. Now I understand. His silence wasn't cowardice. It wasn't surrender. It was power. The power to walk away without giving me the satisfaction of a fight. The power to leave me with nothing but the weight of my own words. And that silence will haunt me forever. So now I'll ask you, the ones listening to my story, would you rather someone scream and fight for you, showing you that you're still worth the struggle? Or would you rather they walk away in silence, and never look back?